Well, hello everybody. Hello, Bettina. How you doing today?
Hi, Eric. Hi, everyone. I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing quite well. You settling back into a routine after being on the road,
Oh,
so to
yeah,
speak,
on the
for
road, on the
weeks on
run,
end.
weeks on end. Well, yeah, 2 weeks. Um, yes, it was kind of interesting afterwards because I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the last show was Saturday night and Sunday morning. I was exhausted, and I thought, how could I go from being so full of energy and being right in it to total exhaustion, but I was. And then this kind of like, oh, what do I do now? Like we everything's been about preparing for this show, and what am I supposed to do now? So there was a bit of that, but I'm back in the routine now. I'm back to my sewing and um, yeah, all my other stuff. So it's good.
Yeah, I don't know. I always find it so great, and I know that we share some personality traits, but to be so into something for months on end, to have it come to a head, and then have it be over, and then move on to other things. I find that a really, for myself, an enjoyable way to live, rather than doing the same thing every single day for years on end. But I do know that there's people like that, Jays on the Myers-Briggs that almost like or prefer that routine every day. But
Mm-hmm.
it's more just a call to figuring out what it is that you are. And we've talked about these personality tests, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, and so on and so forth on the show a
Right.
lot. And that's why it's so important to know what you are, to know where you lean and where you feel most content and fresh and happy, comfortable, so you can do your best work and then align your life to fit who you are in this moment.
Yeah. I think it's for me. It's been invaluable. It's just been something that has just added another dimension to the awareness of what's going on inside me and how I interact in the world. So, yeah, I love those kind of character analysis type things. But I think you can go to a deeper level too. And I think it's the six. The six on the enneagram will be the one that likes same all the time. They're
Mhm.
really not trusting of change. Um, so yeah, I guess sort of to cross a line with the Myers Briggs J, that it would be the six on the enneagram.
Mhm.
But me, no, I like the variety. I think that's why I like the sewing, is that every project's different, and it's not just doing the same thing all the time. So that keeps me interested and excited about it. Excuse me.
Yeah. If you want help to realign your life, or some direction to realign your life, and you haven't yet done an Enneagram test, even a shorthand one or a Myers-Briggs test, you can find them online. And if you haven't seen our shows where we espouse the virtues of them, you can go check that out. But today I want to talk, kind of sometimes we get into topical and recent news on the show, and I kind of wanted I've been on Facebook more this week than I have in previous weeks. I've just spent a lot of time on my computer, and I've kind of been
I
browsing.
noticed.
And sometimes, much to the discussion earlier, there's sometimes months where I just don't go on at all, and then this week, and I've kind of been fascinated by this whole discussion, because it's a really difficult macro discussion on what happened in the United States on Valentine's Day with the shooting in Florida, and you know another horrific example of a mass murder that seems so random. And I'm sure the shooter was provoked in a certain way, coupled with mental illness, coupled with being on drugs, like pharmaceutical drugs. And it makes a soup that it seems like every week or so there's somebody who comes out of that soup and does a random horrific act. Um, and it's been fascinating. These kids are incredible. These kids have really taken up a vocal fight against what was done to them, and their perceived opinions on how to at least take a step in the right direction of solving these problems. That it can happen so randomly at any school, particularly in the United States. And Then the people's reaction, the emotions involved, and how political an issue gun ownership is in the United States, and it's saturating the new, you know, and I have a pretty broad. I got about 33,000, 3,500 different inputs onto my Facebook page, and it just seems to be the predominant story. And then who knows, you know, with all this Russia intrusion into social media and influencing people's opinions, and it just comes to a point where it's difficult to trust what it is that you're reading and watching as being fair and balanced. And you know, I don't think it takes too much of a awareness after you read something or watch something to know that what you just watched wasn't balanced. But if most of your circle leans one way politically or leans one way on an issue, it can be all you see, and you can be like, I don't understand how anybody could disagree with me. And it's more so than the actual gun laws and violence and that issue. I kind of wanted to more talk about, you know, staying balanced and staying in the center of the road and being able to have an intelligible discussion about these things on a topic that's very complex.
Oh, my PC is being slowed. Thank you. Here's the thing.
It's being slowed down by all that I just laid on the table.
Yes, that's just too much for. Yeah. It's not only too much for me, but too much for my computer. So here's the thing. You know, people probably know this about me, but I don't really watch the news. I am not politically inclined. I try to make informed choices when I vote, but pretty much for the most part, after that, I just let things roll the way they do. So for me, I haven't had a lot of. Whereas, like you probably saw my face when you said you have 3,500. Did you say different inputs on your Facebook page? I'm like, what? A lot. To me, it's a lot. I know about the shooting. I know about most of the other ones too, because if you're on Facebook, you can't help but know about them because somebody is going to post something about it at some point. It's not like I'm avoiding the news. It's just I don't want to be full on in the news either, because I think, like you say, you don't know what is the truth. You're always getting a slanted view of what has happened. You're not getting the facts. You're getting the facts charged with opinions and beliefs and egos, basically, which, you know, I mean, that's life. I don't even know what to say about it. It's scary. As a mother, I lived in the States with my kids. That scares me. Like, I'm just grateful that when we were living there, that wasn't as big an issue. Although I remember having conversations with my son at the time when we lived there about should he go into a friend's house, and should that friend suggest that their parent had a gun and do you want to look at it, you come immediately home. So it scared me enough to want to have that conversation with them. It scared me to know that I knew other Canadians that moved to the States that actually went out and bought themselves guns because they felt they needed to protect themselves. It is a very volatile and scary situation. And like you said, the number of guns that are out there and that are available and so easily and readily available, coupled with, like, it's not just gun control. I'm not saying it's not gun control, but it's not just gun control. It's mental health. It's drugs, and, you know, it's all comes together for that perfect storm. And you never know when and where it's going to hit, because it's just one of those things where sometimes someone just snaps and it's a like bang, 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 bang. That's not a very good term to use, but it's just one of those, you know, it just happens and they snap and it's done. You know, I don't even know what to say about it. I really don't, which is probably a first. I'm speechless.
And you sum it up right, because it is such an exponential problem. I like what you said. It's not just gun control. It is gun control, but it's not just gun control. I mean, obviously, I mean, everybody seems to agree you shouldn't allow mentally ill people to get assault rifles and be able to modify them to be automatic. I mean, I think that's a 90 above 90% shared opinion. But the question comes into how do you stop all mentally ill people? Mental illness is a spectrum, and some days people who are mentally ill are perfectly fine for some months, and then some months they're not, and they buy the gun when they were good. Like, it's just, when we the problem is when we talk only in a sliver of the argument, and we get so passionate and we fight on slivers of an argument, we miss the big picture, and like you said, it's an exponential problem that's been growing exponentially in not only in its outcomes, but also its complexity, and when there is somewhere between 350 and 400 million guns in the United States, just cutting the pipeline of an assault rifle altogether, as if that, and that's not even really a plausible solution, because there's always going to be loopholes around the law. The law will always try to catch up, and especially in an issue that's so divided, the law will never act as fast as the people who want to acquire them. And I do get it. It could absolutely stop some people from getting guns, and it could stop the lethality of some of these attacks. But there's nothing to say that this kid couldn't have gotten 4 handguns or gotten any other of the 2,600 makes of guns that are out there, that he couldn't have gotten a whole bunch of legal ones and done what he did. Now I get that there's an ease, and I get there's an automatic firing aspect of it that increases the lethality of each of these incidents, but it doesn't stop the incident. And this only begins to scratch the surface of how complex the issue actually is. And emotional yelling at one another and using Facebook, and so many people now use Facebook for the news. And I'm kind of doubling back on a point where you say, not watching the news. And yeah, I mean, a long time ago, I decided to not watch the news. I used to watch my dad would watch the news after dinner. And I used to want to watch as like a 14, 15, 16-year-old kid, because I was like, oh, watching the news is how you become educated on topics. And it's what the dads would all talk about when they get together at barbecues or whatever. And I wanted to, be intelligent on the issues, at least a little bit, right? And so, but then after watching it for a little bit, thankfully, or whatever it was at that point, I could see through the ridiculousness of it, that of the 6 stories they covered in the half hour, all 6 of them were negative. Most of them involved violence or crashes or something to do with inmates or jail or convictions or court cases. Like, it's all so negative, and it's all so slanted, and it's not really the news. We've kind of given, I mean, Trump has called into question the whole idea of fake news, and while I don't think his interpretation is like perfectly right, he does bring up a very interesting point, because the news, we give such credibility to the word news that, like, oh, well, the authorities who say this is news, so therefore it's news. But news, I mean, if we take the power away from that, or the cultural power away from that word, the news is not news. It's just stories that are happening that gets eyeballs to watch commercials. And the more provocative the stories can be to keep eyeballs on the channel through the commercials is what the news is. And when I kind of figured that out, not to that level of distinction, but at first I was just like, oh my God, this is all just negative. It's all just, it makes me feel crappy. There's something wrong with the portrayal of what news is. And like you, and it's one of the discussions we had very early on when we first kind of met, was that, that we had this discussion about the news. Like, it doesn't serve me to watch it, where I thought it did when I first started watching. And going out there and finding stories. But if it becomes a complicated issue, I know I'm going on here, but if you're like, I don't want to watch the news, but I want, why is the news always so negative? I want to see happy stories. But really, how often do you go out and seek out happy, plain, stories? They're just, to humans, they're just not that interesting. And even if we complain about the news, we don't other, more of a balanced approach to what news is, or what the happenings are in our community. Question to bring out about our humanness, about why we like disaster and car crashes and explosions and pain and conflict in why we like to watch it and why we consume it through our media. So much so that we'll watch advertisements before, in between, and after.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing. It sells. You know, the
Mhm.
exciting stuff sells. And I've noticed in my lifetime, which is quite long, there has been a gradual increase of the intensity of the violence, the fear factor, the bigger, better, stronger, faster, scarier, whatever. Like if you look at a movie from the 1950s or 60s, a sort of what they would call a horror movie, people today would look at it and go, "You're kidding me, right? That was a comedy." But it scared people back then, right? It was scary enough to be called a horror film back then. But then it wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
And for the ego, it's never enough.
Right.
It's like the guns, never enough. Got to have more, got to have bigger, got to have better, got to have stronger, got to have faster. And again, you know, not just the guns, the mental health. And, you know, when I talk about mental health, I talk about emotional volatility all the way up to actual mental illnesses. You know, as parents, this generation seems to want to give their children everything they maybe didn't get when they were growing up. But it's spoon feeding emotions. It's like, oh, you feel bad? Oh, let's go buy you a new shirt, or let's go buy you a new dress, or let's go buy you a toy, or, you know, have something to eat, or whatever it is. On the other hand, trying to prevent our kids from experiencing any kind of suffering or pain.
Right.
And in doing so, we have created this false atmosphere of, you know, everything is perfect. And when it isn't, something drastic has to be done in order to show the world how much pain I'm in.
Right. I think that's a really good point.
And I think that's really scary. I think that's really scary that someone has grown up to the point of being, you know, a young adult without learning how to deal with emotions, either positive or negative. That's a really scary place to be. Now, you put that volatility together with guns and the availability of guns, and you have a mess. You have a real mess. And that's, you know, it's getting more and more and more. And I know they say that video games are not really that bad. But again, you put it together with this emotional volatility, the availability of guns, and this, you know, going around shooting people with no consequences in a game, in a virtual world, then when are you separating that virtual world from, you know, the real world, the physical world that you know, operate in day to day?
Mm-hmm.
It's desensitizing. And I think that's the same thing with movies. Like movies that were horror movies when I was younger are laughable today. And the stuff that is playing today, I can't even watch because it's too disruptive to my fragile little system here. I just can't deal with it because it's just over the top. And yet that's what people are looking for. And it's never enough. So it's that desensitizing, that de-emotionalizing, and then look, here's something that can fix your problems.
Yeah.
So it's a multi-level, multi-layered issue, and we can blame it on one specific thing, which is gun control. But I think there's many different things across the board that need to be examined and really looked at.
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
proper full on really good change.
Yeah, and and included in that too, and you bring up very good points. It's many things, and also the amount of prescription drugs that are being fed to these kids who are struggling to deal with emotions and with intrusive thoughts and so on. And another thing that I kind of just first thought of now, of course, video games have gotten more violent, more graphic, more real. The graphics, the immersion is all increasing with every year, and I coach young kids, and the games that are most popular on Steam, on all the charts of most played games, 7 of the top 10 games are first-person shooters. There's a satisfaction that comes in video games. I'm not saying in real life, but in video games of outthinking your opponent and shooting him before he can shoot you. It's a rush. It's exhilarating. The numbers don't lie. The majority of games that are coming out, the most popular games that come out are all first person shooters. From the perspective of your eyes, even it doesn't even have the person like on the screen. The perspective is from behind the eyes of the hero, and you're always the hero. You're never the villain. Um,
Yeah.
and also on these games, they have the amount of familiarity with weapons is increasing incredibly. I think an average like 9-year-old could name you 10 guns. The average 9-year-old boy, because when you start the game, you start with a regular pistol, and they all have names. And
Mhm.
then as you succeed in the game, you get to unlock more exciting guns, more bigger guns with bigger capacities and higher fire rates and better accuracy and a scope and a silencer and all these kind of things, all the colors. It becomes like your baby in a way, as like it becomes your doll as a 10-year-old boy. you know
Mhm.
and the kids talk about, oh, what's your favorite gun, and the education and the games are doing such an amazing job of simulating reality. Now you have there came into technology controllers that rumble, and now there's virtual reality, and so the guns, they all feel different, they all fire different. The rumble in your hands on the controller, the way that the gun recoils, the way that how many bullets it takes to kill somebody. These are all like things that are you can put side by side in a video game and choose which gun you want to be an expert in and level up and get perks for. And I think this is just one hole down this issue, is the amount of familiarity kids have with guns and their use and what it feels like, and all these simulated sensations in their brain, as well as the drugs, as well as mental illness, as well as parenting being very fractured these days, as well as the frustration. And another point that I wanted to go down on that you talked about was the way that we parent, in ways that sometimes when we helicopter parent, or we don't let kids flesh out their emotions, and we also prevent them from suffering. We talk on this show all the time. I mean, so many of our episodes are about anxiety because it's a real issue in our society. And part of dealing with anxiety is that you have to get it out. It does no good to just to take drugs or to distract yourself. We talk all this time on the show about distraction, not dealing with things. We talk all the time about looking within and really feeling what's going on, finding the root cause if there is one, going deep into it and kind of letting it out, finding a safe space, finding a partner, having a relationship, being vulnerable, being able to communicate, so that these things can come to the surface, they can be let out, and you can relax and you can breathe after. And I think very much so, frustration and anger, especially young boys, because you want to talk about a common denominator in all these shootings, they're all men. Women aren't
Mhm.
going around with these automatic weapons shooting people. It's all boys. And the frustration and anxiety that boys are feeling from a young age. And just like anxiety, when you're 6 and you don't get the opportunity to get angry, go through a temper tantrum to its full completion, resolve it on your own in your bedroom, playing with your toys or whatever, when you are prevented from even getting triggered because we're protected and so coddled. Nobody can lose in sports. I know people like or don't like that whole thing where you can't lose. Everybody gets a trophy. Nobody's a winner. Nobody's a loser. And it's not so much about making losers feel bad, but it is about dealing with success, and it's about dealing with failure. Um, Whether you win a soccer game when you're 11 does not matter any at all. The championship doesn't matter. It's all about dealing with success, dealing with failure, trying your best, coming back, trying harder next time. Boys need that challenge, especially. I can speak as a boy. I don't know about. I just say boys because I am one, and it's very personal to me. And so when you're 6 and you don't get the anger, the frustration out in a healthy way, you're not told how to get it out. You're not even offered enough examples of how to get it out. So that 6-year-old who stomps up the stairs and slams a door and gets in trouble, or the 13-year-old who kicks a hole in the wall, or a 15-year-old who does something destructive like light a fire or something like that. When all of that doesn't get practiced, then you turn into be a 19-year-old who now has access and can legally buy a gun. And now, rather than kicking a hole in the wall, you go to school with a gun. And I know it's a progression. And again, it's all a piece of the soup that is leading to these things happening all the time. And it's not just these like 17, 20, 40 people mass shootings, Las Vegas, like hundreds. There's tons of little ones all the time, every day, every couple of days. There is a school shooting. It maybe only involves 1 or 2 people, or it's an altercation outside at a mall or a strip plaza or something. But this is going on all the time. Yeah. And this one's getting a lot of news now, but there's lots that aren't covered. There's the hundreds of violent deaths in Chicago that go on every year that's not covered. And it is, it kind of brings in together the whole show and all the things we bring up about news and how complicated the issue is, how important it is to deal with our emotions and have a society in which we can do that in an effective way. And boom, there goes half an hour.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, again, like anything else, it's do your little part, whatever you can in your life. In other words, if you have children and you are one of those people who, desperately doesn't want your child to feel pain, just rethink it. Just rethink that process. Or if you know somebody who's having a lot of problems, do what you can to be there for them, to sit with them, to talk with them. It's every one of us doing something, whatever we can, whatever is before us, to help the situation. We can't leave it to the politicians. We can't leave it all to the politicians, because they're in it for whatever reasons they're in it for. That's whole nother show. But yeah, I think we need to be ever vigilant, and just really pay attention to what's happening with those in our lives, and really be there and have conversations about this kind of thing. I remember when Allison, really quick, when Allison was younger, we used to play GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. Which,
I remember it.
I mean, if you think about GoldenEye back then, that was pretty simplistic compared to what the games are now. But I remember saying to her, because I remember these discussions happening even back then, I remember saying to her, okay, you know that this isn't real life, right? You know this isn't real. She said, I know, but it sure gets my frustrations out. And that's kind of an eye-opener. This gets my frustrations out. But what happens when this, with the controller, isn't working to get my frustrations out anymore?
Yeah.
Again, it's that bigger, better, stronger, faster. I need a real gun now to get my frustrations out. And that's where it starts to get really scary. So it's really about having conversation and being aware and vigilant.
Yeah. And that really brings it home for me, because I remember playing GoldenEye, because it was kind of the first real popular first-person shooter. Of course, there was Duke Nukem, and there was Wolfenstein, and there was Doom. But ones with like people and tactics, and as far as mass appeal, it was a very popular game. And yeah, I mean, the immersion really wasn't there. The screen was small. It was pixelated. The graphics weren't great. But I do remember, as something like about 12 or 13-year-old, and for like 2 months, I couldn't wait to go to my friend's Jeff's house because he had GoldenEye, and we would just go, the four friends of us. Sometimes it'd be three times under four, and you could play the 4-player screen,
Yeah, yeah.
and we would just play that thing. And it was like I woke up in the morning, I couldn't wait to get through school so that I could get and I could play, because boy, it was fun. And my favorite thing to do in that game, you had these C4 or Claymore mines. I
Yeah.
forget which one they were, and you could put them on the wall, and you could hide, and you could like wait for your friend to go by them, and you could detonate them. And that was like the funnest way to kill somebody.
Yeah.
And you know, it's almost eerie because this kid in Florida went to school, pulled the fire alarm, the kids come running out, and then, you know,
That's it.
that's eerie.
Mm-hmm.
It's eerie.
Yeah. And scary.
Yeah.
I think we do need a meditation after that.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Yeah.
All right, well, let's do that. Let's close our eyes and take a deep breath. And as we breathe, connecting with that place inside that knows the answers, that knows that all that matters is loving presence, that an expression of love is, in its purest form, the best way to connect and reach out to people. And to really look at where we are in our lives and where those that we love are. And really just make a little promise to ourselves to look around, to be aware, to observe, and to do whatever we can to create an atmosphere of healthy, loving human beings. Because that's all we can do in this space, is deal with those around us. Doesn't need to be a big gesture, doesn't need to be saving the world, but just looking at our own small world and those that are involved in it, and paying attention and being that loving presence, that expression of love for anyone who looks like they might be struggling or suffering or not quite connected to who they are and to those in their lives that love them and care about them. We certainly can't change gun control, and we can't change what's happening on the grand scale, but we can change it in our own lives. And through that, the change will spread. And maybe there will be lives saved because of it. And when you're ready, wiggle your fingers and your toes and bring yourself back to the world.
Yeah. Yeah, we're almost looking the wrong place when we point our fingers at politicians. Yes, there's things they can do, absolutely, but you know, like world peace, like world hunger, you know, like world violence, it's an individual solution
to a global problem.
Yeah, you can't mandate it. You know, you can only affect yourself and the circles around, and get into a place of that loving presence and ask what makes sense to you. And I think if you get in the place of loving presence, you know, violence and tools of violence don't solve the problem long term.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you everybody for watching today, and very much look forward to seeing you all next week.
Have a great week, everyone.